Russia's invasion of Ukraine sent shockwaves across the globe.
Across Ukraine, including the capital Kiev, during rush hour on Monday morning, killing civilians and knocking out power.
This illegal attack on another sovereign country is all the fault of one man, Vladimir Putin. What's next for Russia if it defeats Ukraine? What will happen once Putin is replaced as Russia's president? Geopolitical analyst Peter Zeihan explains the current leadership situation in Russia and what it might do after Ukraine. We've recently done a video on Peter Zeihan regarding China, but today, he'll be sharing his insights on Russia. Thanks for all the support you've shown our channel. Let's dive right into the video.
I mean, if you look at the demographics, it is perfectly reasonable to assume that Putin was going to be the last leader of Russia anyway. When Yuri Andropov took over in the early 1980s, it was a bit of an internal coup in that we had one faction that used to be part of the government take over the government because they thought that the previous two rulers, Khrushchev and Brezhnev, had mismanaged the system so badly that they really needed adults in the room, people who had the full picture of everything that was going on. And in a highly censored totalitarian dictatorship, that meant the intelligence services. So the KGB generated Yuri Andropov, Chernenko, and ultimately Gorbachev, all from the KGB, to run the system. Well, these people stayed in, I wouldn't even call it the background. They weren't officially in charge, but they were always large and present in the 1990s. And when Yeltsin took ill, they're the ones who took over from Yeltsin. So we had a quick revolution, lasted a few years, then Yeltsin got dropped because his health was atrocious. And the KGB has been in the KGB's successor, the FSB, has been in charge of ever since. Now, Putin is obviously from that crowd, but so has everyone around him. Alexei Miller of Gazprom is probably the best example. But the chiefs of all of the major companies that they're called the Silivarchs, the security oligarchs, that have taken over chunks of the Russian economy in large bites ever since 1999. They are all personally beholden to Putin. They are all from that inner circle, and they are all over 50. So there is not a generation waiting in the wings that has been trained. Putin has been very effective at pruning any potential challengers to his rule. So he will be the last capable, competent president of the Russian Federation.
In this first clip, Peter Zeihan talks about a small coup in Russia's history. Peter Zeihan is referring to the time when Yuri Andropov led the Soviet Union. Yuri Andropov found it right to take control over his predecessors after they mismanaged everything in the government. Peter said that after this, the KGB, the former security agency of the Soviet Union, took over the government, lasting up to a few administrations. Peter Zeihan says that the same thing is going on today, as most significant positions in Russia are held by the FSB, the modern counterpart of the KGB. According to Peter, since Putin is so tough on possible threats to his leadership, there is no future generation that would replace them when the time of their retirement comes. In this next clip, Peter points out a possible leadership crisis in Russia.
Every once in a while, we have a faction within that group that kind of rises to prominence because they want to succeed, and as soon as Putin thinks they might be get closer to succeed him, he smashes them. The best case scenario is we get something a little bit like what happened after Mao left in China, like a gang of 4 from the different factions who rules as a committee, and then one of the 4 offs the other 3, and then he's in charge. That's kind of the best case scenario now. I think it'd be more likely that Putin has so removed everyone of leadership talent that we're probably going to have more of an organizational collapse. Igor Sechin of Rosneft, that's the state oil company, is probably the most capable who's left, but everyone else of the 150 KGB members that are left so thoroughly hate him in all things that it's really doubtful that he'd be able to rally anyone to his flag. So there really is no...
In this clip, Peter Zeihan dives more into his previous point where there is not a generation that can replace Putin and his government due to his tough attitude towards possible challengers to his leadership. Peter also discussed what would happen to Russia when Putin leaves the government. Peter Zeihan says that the best case scenario would be for one individual to rise and take power all for himself. But at the same time, he doesn't think that there is anyone around that is capable of doing that. In this next clip, Peter Zeihan compares the US government to the Russian government.
We look at leadership different than the Russians do. The strongman is who rules Russia. It always has been. The terrain does not lead to regional leaders, or regional economics that are separate. So here, Texas, New York, California, Florida, Minnesota, these are all discrete economic entities. And so we have a federal system where each of the states chooses their own leadership and then submits their leadership choices at a representative level to Washington. That would never work in the Russian Federation. In the Federation, you've got Moscow, you've got St. Petersburg, and then you have all these secondary cities that are dependent upon some degree of link to one of those two, and all of them have been conquered by Russia over the course of their existence. Every single one of them. Russia is not a republic. It's certainly not a democracy. It's a multi-ethnic empire. And with that sort of political and economic footing, someone's in charge. And if someone's not in charge, no one's in charge. And the future of Russia, in my opinion, is probably going towards the latter. But for now, it means that you have a strongman in the center who appoints regional strongmen like Kadyrov to look after things for him. This is not about growth. This is not about jobs. This is not about popularity. This is about control.
In this clip, Peter Zeihan notes several differences between the American government and the Russian government. Unlike the federal government of the US, the Russians rely on a more centralized model, wherein other cities rely heavily on global cities such as Moscow or St. Petersburg. Russia also requires strong leadership, according to Peter. Without strong leadership, the centralized model of Russia's government will crumble. Peter also points out a connection between the governments of Chechnya and Russia. He says that Putin uses the Chechens as sort of mercenaries, who would do whatever he pleases, such as assassinations, within Russian borders. In this next clip, Peter talks about what's next for Russia after Ukraine.
Ukraine's, again, this is the middle war. So, Nagorno-Karabakh, Georgia, Crimea, Kazakhstan, these are all kind of in their back pocket now. Ukraine, even control of all of Ukraine doesn't solve the problem on the Western Front. They would, in addition, need Moldova, the northeastern sliver of Romania, that's part of the Bessarabian Gap. That's how the Turks have often invaded. They would also need eastern Poland right up into downtown Warsaw on the Vistula River. That's the Polish Gap. That's where the Nazis like to invade it. And then they would need Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in totality because that's how the Swedes have gotten in the past. So you're talking about 6 more countries, 5 which are members of NATO. Obviously, that's where things get very dicey. I mean, they can probably capture Moldova in a long weekend, although looking at the military effectiveness, so far, maybe I should extend that out to a month.
Yeah, spring break at least. Yeah.
But for the other 5, if Ukraine is able to keep the fire lit, then the Russians aren't going to have enough conventional forces to do this. And the only thing worse than having a Russia that didn't try to do this and just kind of shrivels in time would be a Russia that leapt forward, launched the war, paid all the prices for the war, and still remains strategically unmoored. So there's a point we're going to get to in a few months, probably later this year, certainly next year, where the Russians will have digested Ukraine and Moldova to their satisfaction, their plan, and then they'll have that clash with NATO. And that's when the nukes become a very real question.
In this clip, Peter Zeihan explains Russia's possible next moves after Ukraine. He claims that Russia could invade an additional 6 countries, namely Moldova, Romania, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, in order to completely secure their Western Front. This is where things get intense, as most of these countries are NATO members, meaning that NATO would be prompted to respond to any kind of aggression towards its members. However, Peter says that if Ukraine is able to significantly hurt Russia's armed capabilities, it will not be able to invade other countries anytime soon. Peter concludes his thoughts by saying that the possibility of an all-out nuclear war is high. But what does this exactly mean for the rest of the world? Well, pretty much the end. Nukes have the capability to end civilization as we know it, and we can only pray that Putin will not be stupid enough to use them. What do you think is next for Russia? Do you believe they'll be able to defeat Ukraine? Give us your thoughts on this situation in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like and subscribe. And we'll catch you on the next one.